The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is September 23rd, 2024, and before we start today's big video, I want to mention that, yes, I did not make a video yesterday, and the reason why was because I felt like the news in regard to a certain part of the front was coming out too quickly, and as a result, I decided to delay the release of today's weekly update to a day later, which is today. So, with that being said, though, let's talk about the situation on the front. To start off, we're going to talk about the Zaporozhye direction, or Zaporozhye Oblast, in southern Ukraine. As you can see, the Russians are, for the most part, have basically retaken everything that they lost during the summer 2023 counteroffensive by the armed forces of Ukraine, and are advancing in the direction slowly of the village of Novodenlivka. However, I'm not personally expecting anything too huge in the future, mainly because mud season is coming up, which would make any advances on Orkiv or Orkov incredibly difficult. But also, I'm not expecting anything on Huleopol or Guleopol, which is the Russian name for the town, to happen anytime soon. Again, because I don't think the time is really basically, I don't know, right yet for the Russians to try to take these two towns. But also, it just doesn't make sense. Like, why try to break, or like, why to try to change a strategy that isn't really broken? They're doing so well right now in Donetsk Oblast, so why try to change the trajectory of the direction? I mean, the whole, like, path that the war is going in. Like, why try to change it? There's just no point. However, in recent days, the city of Zaporozhye, or Zaporozhye, was striked by, I think, FABs, and that's why some people are now thinking that an offensive in the oblast here is possible. Though, again, I don't expect anything too big to happen for quite some time, and I don't think the Russians are going to advance on Zaporozhye city until the Russians enter Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, which may not happen until next year in 2025. But anyway, let's get to the situation on the active fronts, all right, where there's actual advances and such. First of all, we're going to talk about the Kursk direction. I'm going to save the best for last, arguably. The Russians are advancing in the direction of Sever Dilikovo and have retaken the villages of Nikolaevo Durino and Durino. They are also right now contesting for the villages of Toltsy Lug and Lyabumovka. And by doing these, they will be able to cut off this key road here that connects Korinovo and the town of Suja, which is the only notable settlement that the armed forces of Ukraine currently control in southwestern Kursk Oblast. But other than that, they don't really hold anything too strategic. Next up in Kharkiv or Kharkov Oblast, there was a report that the Ukrainians had retaken control of the aggregate plant from Russia, but there's not enough evidence available to prove those claims. The Russians are also reportedly trying to retake the village of Taik from the Ukrainians as well. But again, not a lot available. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this front. Fast, I know. In the Kupiansk front, which is also in Kharkiv direction, the Russians are continuing to advance north and south of Pishchine. Now, recently, the Russians have repelled the counteroffensive by the Ukrainians here in the direction of Pabaivka, and as a result, they've not only taken full control of the village, but they have secured it for the most part from the Ukrainians. The Russians are also closing in on around like 3 to 4 villages on the Oskar River here. They're literally closing in on literally splitting the whole river, like this whole front here, in 2 parts. And when that happens, Ukrainian logistics is going to be completely fucked in this area. It will be. But so far, no entrances, like reported entrances into any of these settlements yet, so stay tuned. In a shocking turn of events, the Russians have taken most control of the village of Makivka. Apparently, they still got to cross the river here in order to take full control of it. But what really took people by surprise was the advance down south. Apparently, the Russians took the village of Nevsky. And with that now out of the way, they can now enter Donetsk Oblast from the north and try to take the villages of Novosadove and the infamous village of Terny, which has been, like, contested by both the Russians and the Ukrainians for years, since the Russians were pushed out of the Oska River. The Russians have also started a counteroffensive in the direction of Zarychny too, which is not far from Liman. And I wouldn't be shocked if the Russians try to advance towards Liman again in the foreseeable future. I mean, because they have to if they want to get to Sovyansk and Kramatorsk. But yeah, they're starting a counteroffensive here. Small gains, but they're advancing. Nothing much going on in the Seversk direction. Nothing going much on in the Chaziv Yar direction, aka Artyomovsk. The Russians are, at the moment, clearing this area here, like west of Andriivka, which would allow them to have complete control over the Sovietsky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. And then, here's Toretsk. Oh boy. Where do I start? So apparently, after the Russians recaptured all of New York from the Ukrainians after their failed counteroffensive, the Russians then, after that, basically went on a small blitzkrieg in the village of Nilipivka, I think, and are literally about to encircle the Ukrainians in southern Toretsk. Especially in this industrial zone here. Once all this falls, then I think Toretsk is pretty much cooked. And news has also now just came out, and it has also been confirmed, especially by multiple mappers and even neutral ones. Not by the Ukrainian mappers yet, but all evidence is pointing, especially with the geolocations being provided, that the Russians have established partial control over downtown Toretsk, which is also known as the Citadel, or the city center. They've taken easy control over all these buildings here, all these commie blocks here, and are still advancing as we speak, even though we don't have any confirmations of such advances so far. The Russians are likely going to take control of this whole citadel here, and when that happens, that's pretty much game over for Toretsk, honestly, because everything else is all, like, literally low-rise houses, like single-family homes. It's literally not defendable. It's just not. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are rolling again. They have now finally taken the last Terrakon or waste heap landfill here. And they have also retaken the village of Kruty Yar from the Ukrainians after a reported counteroffensive. The Russians have also reportedly retaken control of Krasny Yar, and are also reportedly contesting the village of Mykolaiivka at the moment. And I'm expecting that to fall to the Russians very soon. The Russians have also now been confirmed to control around 95% of Hrudivka or Grodivka from the Ukrainians. And with that, that pretty much puts them in range of Myonohrad or Myonograd. We don't have any news, like recent updates from Suky Yar and Lisovka or Lisivka. So, yeah, stay tuned for that. Maybe next week. But yeah, the Russians have finally secured Novogradivka. And with the advances here, especially towards Pokrovsk, it makes, honestly, defending this whole area a lot harder. And apparently, the Russians are now within artillery range of Pokrovsk. So Ukrainians cannot really use Pokrovsk and Myonograd as a logistical hub anymore. It's now a frontline city, which completely changes everything in this part of the Donetsk front. It really does. Now, going a little further south, the Russians from the town of Ukrainsk have taken complete control over this Terracon here, which, by the way, is a key road between Ukrainsk and arguably, by extension, Giernik, and also the small town of Sukurne. And with this, Seladove is now partially encircled. They cannot go up north. For the most part, it's basically under Russian fire control. They, for the most part, cannot really go down south. They can only go, like, from the western direction. That's all they can really do. But otherwise, it looks like the Russians are looking to bypass Seladove or Selidova and essentially put it in a partial encirclement or cauldron, which would not only make it easier for the Russians to take the town from the Ukrainians, but it would also, I guess, lessen the odds of the town being destroyed any further. And it would also force anybody who's in Selidova to surrender. Maybe. That's like the best case scenario for the Russians. Also, the Russians have advanced into the town of Giernik, or Gornak. I don't know. It really depends on what you interpret it as, but I'm going to call it Giernik. So the Russians have entered the town of Giernik, and there have been reports, like conflicting reports, that the Russians have already taken half control of the town, including the areas where all the commie blocks are, but there's no confirmation to prove it. But it is confirmed, however, that the Russians have entered the town of Giernik itself and have established a strong foothold there. In addition, the Russians have also established complete control over Zheleny Persh and Zheleny Drew. And as a result, Giernik is now pretty much in a cauldron, especially now that these roads and railroads here have also been taken under Russian fire control too. So, again, just like Selidova, the only way out for the Ukrainians is through the western direction. But time is running out, because if this town here falls, basically everything north of Kharkov is going to easily fall to the Russians like dominoes. Now, also, Hostre, including its prison, have been easily taken by the Russians, and as a result of this, it's very probable that the village of Maximilianivka will probably be steamrolled by the Russians in the future. Again, just like Selidova, they have to go west in order to evacuate. They can't go north. They probably shouldn't go south anymore, considering the situation going, down here. I won't spoil it. But yeah, there's not really much they can really do here. And if I were them, I'd start pulling back from Maximilianivka, because it's just bad logistics at this point, or bad OPSEC, to have the guys stay in this pointless village here. And I honestly don't even know if they're going to be able to defend Kharkov for much longer, especially when the Russians get up to the north of the reservoir here, the Vovcha River. I just don't think it's going to be possible for them. But yeah, as soon as Giernik falls to Russia, along with Sukurne, everything here is going to easily fall to Russia. And then after Maximilianivka is taken, the Ukrainians will then have to make a decision, whether or not if they want to actually fight for the town like warriors and potentially die there, or do they want to tactically retreat, even though it would mean a major PR disaster for them. Well, they don't really got a lot of options left, because, as all of you know by now, everybody, the town of UGLEDAR is about to fall. And in case if you don't believe me, well, here we go. This is the big one, and I saved this one for last. So, after months of trying to take the 00532 road, along with taking Konstantinivka and also securing all these areas here, along with starting the advance too towards Novoukrainka and Bohoyavlinka, the Russians have started an actual offensive, especially after the taking of the coal mines in Vuldain towards UGLEDAR itself. And there is now reports that the Russians are in the town of UGLEDAR, and there are conflicting reports that the Ukrainians are going to try to stay there and die to the last man. And there's also conflicting reports that they are going to leave the town as a whole. through the dirt roads, even if they're unreliable. But we'll just have to wait and see what they do. UGLEDAR is pretty much encircled, and also it is now confirmed that the Russians, especially thanks to a deep state UA confirming this, that they have now reversed their losses in the January 2023 failed assault on UGLEDAR, and they have now taken the low-rise Dakas here. So everything here has been retaken by the Russians, and as a result, they are now literally just a street crossing away from UGLEDAR. And as far as I'm concerned, it looks like the Russians have already established control over some commie blocks within UGLEDAR. And as far as I know, I don't think defending the town is wise at this point. The Russians clearly got their shit together. They learned from their mistakes last year in 2023 and actually went around the town and turned it into a cauldron, which is what they should have fucking done last year. But, hey, they did it anyway. They're going to take the town. This game is over in UGLEDAR, and once this is done, Karakove and Velika Novosilka are pretty much cooked. Because after UGLEDAR, it's arguably going to get easier because the defenses north of it are not as good, and everything is just like low-rise single-family homes and also empty fields. We all know what's probably going to happen next, and it's not good news for the Ukrainians. In fact, by the way, right now, everybody, I should mention before I end today's video. Oh, yeah, and also another thing, the Russians are also starting to advance, too, towards the town of Velika Novosilka itself from the southern direction, and also are trying to enter Makarivka, but nothing has, I guess, materialized as a result of that yet. But anyway, getting away from that, Vladimir Zelensky, if you want to say his name in Russian, decided to fly from Kiev all the way to the United States. He visited Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is where our current president Joe Biden was born, and apparently he's he checked out the I guess factories where they're making the shells to ship to Ukraine. I'm trying to look for Scranton, Pennsylvania. Give me a moment while I look for it. That's Allentown. Where is Scranton? Where is Scranton? But apparently, Zelensky visited Pennsylvania recently. Oh, here it is. So he visited this whole area here to check out like the factories where the shells are being made. And also, he's going to make a speech at the United Nations where he will talk about once again, how the Russians are evil, how they're fighting bravely for their independence, and that everyone should support them and ditch the Russians. But let's be honest, no one's going to do it, at least in the global south. They're going to keep supporting Russia and doing business with them. But also, I even heard reports that Zelensky is going to try to convince the U.S. government, and this apparently will be his last chance of doing so, according to many, to try to get a full-blown invitation into NATO. Like, the situation in Donbas is that bad. And with the Kursk offensive now being completely reversed, it doesn't surprise me at all that he went to Washington to try to convince Biden to save him at the 11th hour. I'm not going to be surprised when this fails because the United States does not want a world war with Russia. I mean, everyone can make fun of Russia all they want for the red lines and shit. But the fact is, you guys really want to be in a war with Russia at all? Just the idea of it? I don't think so. But also, take this to account, okay? If Russia were to be, striked with those long-range missiles by the Ukrainians, what it's going to lead to is a significant level of escalation, and it may force the Russians' hand to push even further in Ukraine, to perhaps completely take it over in a more quicker fashion. I doubt this is going to happen, though, because I honestly don't know or think if the Western countries are that stupid. I just don't know if they're going to do that. I feel like, from their point of view, they already tried everything they could to defeat the Russians, even if some people would argue it was a half-assed job. But At the end of the day, some people are going to assume that the writing is already on the wall for the Ukrainians and that it's just no longer worth it to support them. It just isn't. And that's why I ultimately believe the United States will decline Ukraine's proposal to join NATO. Literally. The war is all but lost. And whoever the next president is, regardless if it's Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, they're going to be the ones with that burden on their back. They're going to be the ones that will be ridiculed for the inevitable defeat of Ukraine and the return of Russia as a global superpower. They will be. And there's nothing anyone can really do about it. And so, that's going to do it for today's video, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please comment below what you think of the news that just occurred in Donetsk Oblast and in Kursk as well, especially Kharkiv direction. And I'll see you all next time. I hope all of you guys have a great day, and hopefully I'll be able to deliver you all a video on Sunday night instead of today. So take care and stay safe.